When you have stress, play chess. When you fall on your ass, play chess for a real deal. Follow Christian Seel.
In round 7 of the Bundesliga, we played against the team of TU Dresden. We lost the match with a score of 2-6, but the match was much more competitive than the result suggests. I personally had the great opportunity to take on yet another top 50 player, in this case the Hungarian Grandmaster Zoltán Almási, whose rating is just below 2700. Alright, let's take a look at the game. My opponent opened with the move knight to f3, and I was somewhat expecting that, so sometimes he also goes e4, and I had some preparation against that. But I was kind of expecting him to go knight f3, because I feel that they have figured out this as one of my weaknesses. Both Abasov and Bogner already went for knight f3, followed by c4 with good success. So in the game against Abasov, I also played c5, and after knight to c3, I played d5 in the game against Abasov, and after the opening, I was in a really terrible position. So therefore, this time I thought about deviating from that, and actually I played the move knight to c6, leading to the symmetrical lines of the English opening. And if you take a look at my game against Ivan Sheparinov, which I played with the white pieces, I now tried to repeat exactly the line that he played against me with the black pieces. So I took him kind of as an idol for a good opening play as black. All right, my opponent Zoltán Almási followed the same line that I played against Sheparinov, and he played as well d4, which is the main move of this symmetrical English, and now we arrive at the main position of the symmetrical English. Yeah, in this position, Sheparinov played queen a5 against me, and I thought it might be a good idea to just repeat what he did. Yeah, and here's where my opponent deviates from my play in the game against Sheparinov. So in that game, I played knight back to c2, and he goes for one of the other main lines in this position, which is the move e2 to e3. Now, the idea of e3 is to protect the knight on d4, of course, and in particular, if I take now on d4, he can often take back with a pawn as well. So this means his queen is also now free to move. The second idea of e3 is to avoid queen to h5 from black, because now white could just take on h5. Yeah, I played d6, which is the normal move in this position, and he went for bishop to d2. So you might ask yourself, why doesn't he take the pawn on c6? Well, if he takes like this, then after rook b8, I get a lot of counterplay along the b file. My next moves are going to be bishop to e6 or bishop to h3, and then rook f to c8. And yeah, this structure is quite vulnerable. In particular, it's hard to move the bishop because b2 is hanging. It's hard to move the b2 pawn because then the knight on c3 is hanging, and therefore, yeah, this position is not good for white. So that's why people do not take there with the bishop. Sorry, with the knight first. What one could do is to take with the bishop, and then after takes and queen c7, knight d5, c takes d, and let's say, for instance, bishop b7, one gets a position which is kind of standard for the English opening, in which black wins back the pawn at some point, and white finishes development with an about equal position. So in each case, after taking on c6, black's chances are decent, so that's why he went for the main line, which is bishop to e2. Yeah, in this position, black has different options, and that's why I went for this whole line, because I thought after bishop d2, black can go bishop d7, which is what Almási played himself as black in one game. Black can go queen a6, black can also go queen c5, and black can do what I did in the game, which is to play the move queen to b6. Thus I went for this line because I thought in this way I can get him out of book pretty quickly, because with all of these small different queen moves, it's very hard to keep track of all the subtleties. Yeah, and therefore my opponent also now started thinking after queen b6, and then came up with the computer move, which is also, I think, the strongest move in this position, which is queen to e3. The idea is now that I should not take on d4, because then white can just take on b6, and let's say such a position is really pretty bad for black, because this double pawn can easily become a weakness, and it's not very pleasant to play with this structure, because after bishop e3 at some point this pawn is already somehow under threat. So therefore, after queen b3, my idea was to go queen to c5, and I had already also prepared this line at home. Well, what's the big fuss about playing queen b6 first and now queen c5 after the queen lands on b3? The idea is that this queen might now be placed worse than on d1, which might be a little bit counterintuitive. But the reasons are, first of all, now the queen is protecting this c4 pawn, which should ideally be protected by the b pawn. And secondly, the queen does no longer protect the h5 square from d1. And so I always now have the option to swing the queen over to h5. And that's why I went for this queen b6 and only then queen c5 move, with the idea of having the white queen already on b3. Well, enough for opening subtleties. So he now started thinking again, and indeed, in many lines, he realized it's quite tough for white to play if black gets queen h5 and then maybe knight g4, and therefore he decided to offer a queen trade straight away. This queen trade is also connected to a pawn sacrifice, and therefore I was a little bit surprised to see that on the board. The move is queen b5. Yeah, now black has the option of taking a pawn on d4, winning a pawn by taking on d4, or to go something like knight to e5. But after knight e5, I felt I can just go b3, and then it's not so clear what I really accomplished with the move knight to e5. So therefore, after quite some thought, I decided to take this pawn on d4. So I went for knight takes d4, e takes d, and queen takes d4. Yeah, so the computer gives this position as being around equal. During the game, I first thought the position should be quite decent for me, but it's also not so easy. So he definitely has some compensation. In particular, after bishop e3, queen g4, he has these very long diagonals for his bishops, which makes it really hard for me to move these pieces on the queen side. So once I move my bishop, usually my b7 pawn is hanging. Once I move my rook, my a7 pawn is hanging. So that's the positional compensation he has. The other thing that could be noted right now about the position is that it's difficult for black to make a move exactly for that reason. So these pieces cannot really move, so white has some time. And he used that time to make a very calm move, the move b2 to b3. This is a prophylactic move. I think one idea is that he wants to avoid bishop to e6, because after bishop to e6, c4 would be under attack. So he prophylactically protects this pawn on c4. And the other idea is that he's not yet sure where to put his two rooks. And he does not yet want to commit one of the rooks to a particular square. So it might be that the rooks are perfectly placed on c1 and d1, d1 and e1, or maybe e1 and c1 even. And therefore he prefers to make a calm move like b3 first, and only then, after he sees how I react, to commit his rooks to particular squares. So I think b3 was a pretty strong move. I answered that with a6, first attacking the queen, and the queen goes to a5. Yeah, and here we now reach the first crucial position, and in this position, and the move after before already, I started thinking a little bit, and I was trying to somehow make a kingside attack work. The way in which you could start a kingside attack now would be to go e5. So the idea is I want to go queen h5, but I have to cut this line first in order for him not to exchange queens. So let's say e5, but then he can just go rook d1, and after queen h5, I might now be threatening knight to g4, but he can just play the move h4. Looks a little bit risky maybe at first sight, but I don't really have any options of weakening his kingside right now. So therefore, I felt that after h4, all I'm left with is a very, very bad structure, and therefore the move e5 in this position is not really what I should do. Instead, I opted for the move queen to f5, which is maybe also not the strongest move in the position. So I guess maybe from an objective point of view, rook b8 would have been the strongest move. The idea of rook b8 is, of course, to prepare bishop e6 to protect this pawn. But during the game, I was somewhat afraid of queen to c7. The computer, though, is not particularly impressed by white's play and just suggests to play queen h5, when after queen takes b8, I can go queen g4 and knight g4 with an immediate attack, and then to go for something like this, where now the c3 knight is hanging as well, so sacrificing an exchange, but white cannot really take it, I guess, because then I'm going to get him on the black squares. So the black squares are just so weakened now. I will play bishop e5, and g3 is very weak, and the computer gives this as completely winning for black. So maybe after knight e3, white can still try some computer lines like knight to d5, but in any case, so let's say some line like this, and bishop g4 followed by bishop e5, and black is at least fine, and it's of course much easier to play this with black. So therefore, rook b8 would probably have been strong and might objectively have forced him to go for this move repetition. But I think he would probably have played on with some other move like maybe rook d1. But then my position should be decent enough after bishop e6. Okay, enough of that. Let's come back to the game. And as I said in the game, I played the move queen to f5 with the idea of exchanging queens. During the game, I felt that this is a good move, but I think in hindsight, rook b8 was somewhat stronger. So he took, and I took back with the pawn. Another option would have been to take with the bishop, but then he wins 2 pawns back. And although his bishop is somewhat out of play here, and I might now have some concrete counterplay with knight g4, I was afraid that in the end his pawns on the queen side would prevail. Particularly these 2 passed pawns might be very annoying in some end. So therefore I decided to take back with the pawn. Played rook c1, intending to go knight d5 at some point to open the c file. Rook b8. Again, the same comment as before applies. He can at any time go bishop a7, rook a8, and back to e3, in which case I would have just taken the draw in the game. And since he's rated so much higher than me, he didn't want to do that. Rook e1, rook e8, and now he goes for the maneuver with knight d5, which I mentioned beforehand. This is again a critical position, and the first move that one might think about is to take on d5, but I was not entirely sure about this position when white's position is just so much easier to play. So even though I'm a pawn up here, I don't really like black's chances in this position. So therefore I did not play that. I also did not play the move e6, chasing the knight away, because now maybe you can take a look what white can do here. The right answer is white can just win the rook by playing knight to c7, followed by bishop to a7, and my rook cannot move anymore. Thus, after knight d5, I needed to create additional squares for this rook in order to prevent the drastic consequences after bishop a7, and that's why I played bishop to d7. Knight c7, and now I played just rook to f8, with of course the idea of meeting bishop a7 with rook to c8. Yeah, that's also what happened in the game. Another maybe complicated line could have been something like c4, when similar ideas as the ones in the game would have occurred, with knight to e4, with again very, very complicated play. Let's say, for instance, c takes d, e takes d, and knight d5. And I'm not sure who's better here. Instead, after rook f8, my opponent played bishop a7, rook c8, and bishop b6. So this is extremely committal in a sense, because he now has this knight on c7, and after my next move, it becomes clear that it's not so easy for this knight to re-enter the game. I just played e6, cutting this last square on d5, and from a tactical point of view, bishop b7 does not work because of rook b8, and I win a piece. So that's why you cannot do that. And thus the obvious move for white after e6 is to go after this pawn, which now has lost the protection from the pawn on e7, and to just go rook c to d1. Okay, now I have to protect the pawn, and the most logical way is to just go knight to e4. Yeah, and here I actually had to calculate a few lines. So one line which is critical here is what happens if white goes bishop takes e4, d takes e, and rook takes e4. I was worried about this for a bit, but then I saw I can just go bishop c6, and after rook g4, attacking g7, maybe also d6, I have this nice move bishop to f3, winning a rook. So therefore, after bishop takes e4, f takes e4, white probably has to go rook takes d6, and after bishop c6, black has the pair of bishops, and I think if anyone, then black is better here. So that's why after knight to e4, he had to go for something else. Maybe you can try to find the computer move here. Well, this move is really difficult to see. It's the move g3 to g4. The idea of the move is very logical, though. So the worst piece of white is this knight on c7, and therefore the idea of this move is to bring this one back into the game by playing g takes f, and later on knight to d5. So after g4, I think the position would still remain unclear. Instead, he played f3, and now I thought I might be taking over control by just going knight c3, rook d6, and bishop c6. And indeed, this is already kind of critical for white. Now a2 is hanging, so white has to protect that with playing a4. And I found a strong resource for black. You can pause the video and see if you find this move as well. Yeah, well, this move is bishop to f6. If I go rook d8 immediately here, there are some tactical problems. For instance, knight b5 comes to mind. And therefore, I would like to play bishop f6 first, in order to go rook d8 in the next move when I overprotect the square on d8. And I think here is the last point at which he could go for an equal position with rook takes c6. So let's see, takes, and takes on a6. And then he has this position, which is quite complicated and which I think might be around equal. But I think this is not really what he wanted at that point. And note that compared to the game, my rook is on f8, whereas in the game my rook will be much more active in a similar position. So that would have been quite a complicated position. So let's say bishop e7, f4. And yeah, white has also some trumps with these pawns. But of course, black is an exchange up. So instead, he chose to go a5. And now I felt after rook fd8, now I have to be clearly better. And the reason is that he cannot take on d8, because then I just go bishop d8, and I win the knight on c7. And therefore, after rook fd8, he's basically forced to sacrifice the exchange now. Rook takes, b takes, and knight takes a6, when I can just go rook to d2. And with the rook on the second rank, of course, it's a completely different story than with the rook on f8. Therefore, I was now quite optimistic about my chances. In particular, I wanted to meet f4, which I thought to be the most natural move in the position for white. I wanted to meet f4 with c5. So this was my plan. Well, now the idea is to that after bishop takes c5, I can just go rook takes c5, bishop d4 check, and bishop takes c5 with a winning position for black. Instead of playing f4, though, he played the move king to f1. And then during the game, I just calculated one line. I didn't have much time left here. I just calculated c5 and saw that I will at least get a draw there, and then went for it. Probably the best move in this position would have been to go f4 to really make this bishop look silly, because now this bishop looks against this pawn forever, and it will be very, very difficult for white to reintegrate this piece into the game. Thus, I think f4 would have been very strong. Nonetheless, I went c5. And yeah, I just wanted to secure a draw at this point, with maybe an option to go for some tactical tricks. But yeah, he now made a huge blunder, which both of us did not see in the game. So he now took on c5 with the bishop. Instead, he should have gone knight takes c5, and after bishop d4, just knight back to a6, or maybe knight d7, with the idea of attacking the bishop on d4, which probably would now force me to give a perpetual like this. Yeah, so check, again attack the rook, and king f1. So this is the line which I had seen, and where I thought, okay, I can check if I have something else. So let's say, for instance, after king g1, king g1, whether I have some other option here. I was not sure, or maybe even here I could think about playing another move, like maybe e5, for instance. But I was sure that I had a draw in hand with rook f2, and therefore I played c5, with this line being intended. Yet, to my surprise, somewhat he took there with a bishop. And this is a huge blunder, which I didn't see in the game, but it's also not super easy to see that, especially in time trouble. So I cannot really blame myself too much on it. And yeah, he also missed it, so it's clearly not something which you can easily see. Yet, maybe you can take a look at the position for black and find the strongest move for black. All right, today, the strongest move is not the flashiest one, but it's a very simple move. So the move is the move rook to a8, attacking the knight on a6. And the problem that white faces now is that once he retreats with the knight, I will just collect the a5 pawn, and then the game is basically over. So let me give a sample line. Bishop to e3, rook to b2. Now the knight has to move. Let's say knight b4, rook a5. And now the b3 pawn is falling. I'm also threatening to come to the second rank with both rooks at some time. And it's basically a resignable position. So I'm pretty confident I would have won that position even against this very strong opponent. So yeah, this was my chance to collect a big scalp. But I didn't see it. So instead, after bishop takes c5, I did not have much time left, maybe three or 4 minutes here, and I went for the safe draw in a sense, which is just to take on c5 with the rook. Knight takes and bishop to d4. Yeah, and here, when I calculated the line, when I played c5, I thought, okay, I will have a perpetual with rook f2, rook e2, and maybe then I can look for something better than that. But after the strong move b4, which he played now, I don't think I have anything better than giving the perpetual. So that's what I did in the game by playing rook f2 check, rook e2 check, rook f2 check, and rook e2 check back. I mean, what I could do, so the game ended in a draw after rook e2 check. What I could do here as well is to give the check on b2 and then to take another pawn, but I doubt that that I have any real winning chances here, because in the end he still has a passed pawn, and even without this pawn, this should be possible to draw it for white. So that's why after king g1, I just played rook e2 check back, attacking the rook. Of course, the king has to come back, and this game was drawn by move repetition. Well, what are my feelings after the game? I was happy that for the first time the opening went somewhat okay. Then I came under some slight pressure, but I feel I played the early middle game pretty well and managed to equalize. And then I think he maybe overpushed a little bit and went for this very risky maneuver with knight to c7, which in the end allowed me to get an advantage. So both f4 in this position, paralyzing his kingside, as well as the combination of the quiet move rook to a8 in this position, which both would have given me a very big advantage. Not completely easy to spot in time trouble, so I cannot really say that I'm disappointed in any way. I still feel it's a great result to get a draw against such a strong player, and given his reaction, so he was shaking his head, I also think that I should be happy about getting a draw against such a strong guy. Well, thanks a lot for watching the video, and I hope you tune in for the next one. See you. Bye-bye.